Hi, and welcome back to Recovery His Way on the campus of the His Way Recovery Center in Huntsville, Alabama. I'm Stuart Whiting, sitting down with our director once again, Tom Reynolds. Hey, Tom.
Hi, Stuart.
And happy birthday, Tom. We got a chance to surprise you just a moment ago.
You did. It was a great surprise.
Yes.
I had no idea it was my birthday.
Especially when we come up behind you while we open the door and crash a meeting. Yeah, it's a reminder that, time moves on and seasons change. And thankfully, we're getting to a season I love here in fall and all that brings in the holiday season.
Yep.
Well, we're continuing today with our discussion about the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous as that's come, as they've put those and recognizing that there's so much wisdom in here because they're based on biblical principles. And we want to kind of flesh out what those principles are and how they can be important to any group particularly of believers, of Christians. Mm-hmm. And we incorporate those here in meaningful ways within our curriculum and in ways that maybe aren't as obvious to the 12 steps, but we see the value in them. So why don't you take us through where we've been so far as we get up today to step 8?
Right. So, the first 3 steps that we talked about is about having peace with God, really establishing God as an authority, God as a foundation, and really putting faith there. And then really in step 4, you start evaluating yourself then. You start evaluating the harm you've done, the mistakes you've made, the sins you've committed, all that kind of stuff. And then you begin a process of trying to reconcile that. And now as you get to this 8th step, you start the process of now going from the internal part to kind of getting out and begin to reconcile with people. And so it's kind of the starting of this process of making peace with people. I'm having peace with God, I'm getting peace within myself, and now I'm making peace with people and starting the outflow of everything. God's worked this thing in my life, and now I'm going to outflow it and start seeing it work out with that.
So I'll read it real quick. Number 8, we made a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. Mm-hmm. So to this point, except for, I guess, a confidant or someone that you've brought in to kind of confess, your own shortcomings, a lot of this has really just been almost on your own,
right.
Almost like behind a closed door,
right.
Your internal. And now we very much are seeking out others that may not even know that we've been going through this process to this point. Exactly. Because of making a list of all persons we had harmed. So when they use that word harmed, I don't know if it's a word we use a lot. What is the scope of harm that, as you've seen it, particularly maybe in light of our residents and the things that have come through in their lives that they need to go make amends about?
Well, there's it's kind of layered, multi-layered, I'd say. I mean, there's kind of the obvious things. Obviously, in a lot of cases, there's broken relationships, broken promises, damage done relationally and those kind of things. Obviously, damage even done materially, stealing things, stealing money, misappropriating funds, lying, stealing, those kind of things.
Often things we probably could, get the authorities involved over.
Right, sure. And, most of the kind, obviously some of these guys come because of legal things, but the mass majority of the harm that's been done has been, not brought into the justice system at all. But I think there's a deeper harm that happens that sometimes a part of a process of working on this is really coming to discover that harm. When the prodigal son returns to his father, he says, "Father, I've sinned against you and against heaven." Mm-hmm. And so there's a very clear, I've sinned this way in my relationship with you, but I've also harmed God. I've also harmed something much deeper and much more significant than that. When David says, talks about his sin and confesses his sin, he talks about how he harmed God and that was the fundamental foundation of that. And I think really discovering that is really important. One of the things that, the first thing that Jesus says from the cross, as they are crucifying him, he says, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." And I a lot of times talk to our guys about that. So do the Romans not know that they're killing Jesus? No, they do know that. Do they not know that they're gambling for his garments? Do they not know that the Jews are there ridiculing him and mocking him? No, they're very aware of that. But they're not aware of who they're really doing it to. They're not aware of the gravity of the offense. And I guess that became clearest to me when a long time ago, we grew up in a lot of neighborhoods. We lived in a single story home in a development kind of thing, and in kind of a middle income kind of area. My mom always had a dream that one day they'd be able to build their own house. And we lived pretty modestly, but Dad saved and worked and kind of planned. And one day they bought a piece of property and got to start from scratch, from choosing the property, choosing an architect, designing a house, and having a house built all the way from the ground up, which was the dream of my mother. And my mother had not grown up very well off, and so she valued that a lot. And it was really, I know when she moved in, and I was a teenager at the time, I didn't really appreciate all that it meant to them either, but my mother really cherished that. And my dad was proud of the fact that he could provide that for my mom, and she deserves this and that kind of thing. And my brother kind of got going on the wrong side of the street for a while when he was in high school, and he got running with the wrong crowd. And there was a time when my parents and family were on vacation. I had since grown up and left the house, but my parents and family were all on vacation, and my brother's friends broke in the house and stole stuff. And, my brother was aware of it, obviously, and had set that up. And they took, pretty meaningless stuff in general. Some of it upset my mom that, some family heirlooms and stuff got taken. But I remember the thing that my mother was most upset about was the fact that that dream home had been violated. Right. And that they could have returned all the stuff that they had taken. And it would never recover the harm of feeling like her castle had been invaded. Yeah. And I remember talking to my mother years and years later. She never felt safe in that house again. She never felt comfortable there again. She never felt like it was that house that she had dreamed of, simply because of that event. And that's a harm that we wouldn't typically know about. It's, do they know they're breaking in the house? Do they know that they're taking these things? But do they realize the depth of that harm in a person's life that sometimes is irreparable?
Yeah, and you made me think of that deep level of understanding. It coincides with the words we use in our mission statement when we talk about reclaiming, rebuilding, and restoring. When we talk about restoring, I think all of the guys here appreciate what the vision is for their life from God's point of view. And it's always been that, and restoring back to that. And to really get a sense of, it's a little bit off topic, but to really get a sense of the true nature of reality for you. And it's not just about, not being on drugs or alcohol. It's about really, tapping into the deep, meaningful moments in your potential for life. And we want to restore you to what that always has been. And to get past just the what's on my ledger of things that, you can count against me. But to really have, this in the relationships that in that story you tell really comes out really well. And so I guess, one thing we do here is obviously try to foster that kind of deep thinking about what is the real relationship you have with your family and what is the harm you've done. But here, I guess at this step, maybe we're still just trying to become willing to make some amends. Right. And it sounds like even in the language, we're addressing that. I may not even know how to do it yet, but I'm just, I just know I need to go do something right where I've done something wrong.
And this step's really about just being willing, one, to make a list and just put pencil to paper and just start listing the names of people and what has happened that harmed them. I mean, it's amazing how impactful it is just to begin to see a piece of paper fill up with names of some people maybe you haven't even thought about since elementary school. They all of a sudden are popping up on your radar, or, an old girlfriend or somebody, that you knew at church or whatever those things are. And you start making that list and start really becoming aware of it. It can be daunting. And then to kind of come to the second stage. So the first step is the first stage is just willing to make the list. And then secondly, start having God work on my heart again to make me willing to make those things right. So, nothing's really happened other than make a list at this point, but it's all still this internal preparation for something that I'm about to do.
So have you seen any times, with residents here where, you've had them come to that moment of just, oh yeah, when I'm making the list and
Right.
wow, I really need to go take care of this.
It's interesting. As I've mentioned, we have a small group that we're kind of doing this through because I'm kind of preparing this marriage group thing and doing these lessons in the marriage group. Well, one of the guys in the group who's gone through our program and I've known for a good while now, he's always been very adamant about the fact that he can't forgive a relative of his. Mm. And even as we were going through this lesson, he was really resisting the idea that there's just, and he's been in recovery a good while, but he's like, there's just no way I'm going to do, no. There's no, and I remember even one of the other people in the group said, well, God says right here, the Bible says right here, and this guy's a believer and very expressive about that. And then it was kind of, he's a real kind of stubborn and kind of tough guy kind of thing. He didn't say anything in the group. He was very adamant at first and got kind of quiet later. And then he texted me a couple of days later. And he said, I sent a text message to my sister who I had spoken to in eons. Mm. And he said, and I, apologized to her and started opening up a conversation to start making that right. Is that close to what I'm supposed to be doing here? And I was just like, yay, that's awesome. Because a few days ago, he was like, I just assumed she'd be dead. He was very, very opposed to her in a lot of ways. So, I really see some amazing things that happen and kind of, eye-opening when people start realizing the depth of what they've done. I think that's one of the great things and one of the challenging things about this program is if you really get into this and really deal with it seriously, there's a lot of grief that comes. There's a lot of, when you start really looking at the reality of the destruction that you've left behind, the wake of just destruction, it's like a tornado is just torn through, and you're the tornado kind of thing. And going back to that ravaged area and realizing the depth of the damage that you've done, it can be overwhelming and daunting, and a lot of guys can't handle that part of the recovery, and a lot of times they'll relapse just over facing these kind of lists. The guys who do well are the guys that are willing to kind of trust God, deal with the grief, mourn that grief, and I think that's really important. A lot of times we get to that point of grieving and mourning, and we just go back to our old habits of trying to manage that with alcohol or drugs or escapism of some kind, instead of walking through and trusting God to really address those things.
And it, I think, highlights the importance of doing this in community, having support. Right. And you have your group that's doing this in that, but in a 12-step program here on campus. And because the story you tell there of that guy, it's the word convicting him, and it's the community that is also encouraging and supporting. And I think maybe you were referencing a passage in Matthew 5 where Jesus says, when you come to the altar and remember that you have something against your brother, forget exactly how it reads, then you need to leave your gift and go take care of that.
Right. And I think that's, I'd really emphasize that passage because, he talks about initially, you've heard it said, don't murder. I tell you, don't be angry. And then as he internalizes that, he talks specifically about this. If, don't come to God with your worship if you haven't taken care of things with your brother first. So it kind of, as you're going before God, God's calling me to reconciliation with people. And so God says, hey, just put me on hold for a minute, because putting me first means you're going to deal with those things. And the real thing Jesus emphasizes in Matthew 5 is the idea of this is done urgently. This is done immediately. This is done not begrudgingly, not hesitatingly, not procrastinatingly. It's done immediately. Because if you want to be right with God, being right with people is a critical part of that. John says later on in 1 John, how can you say you love God who you can't see if you can't even love your brother who you have seen? So really our worship vertically with God is fundamentally, foundationally based upon the kind of horizontal relationship.
That doesn't resonate well, particularly among probably our American sensibility about Christianity and having the pattern that we go and how we worship. And it's like Jesus, I think, would turn all that on its head in this passage. And also when he's asked, what's the greatest command? It's like, well, love the Lord your God and love your neighbor as yourself.
Right.
It's inseparable.
Right.
It's impossible to ever decouple those things. And in those moments, we recognize it.
Right. And one of the stories, I love that Jesus, that says Luke shares in the gospel is when Jesus comes into town with Zacchaeus. And Zacchaeus is apparently a very short in stature tax collector.
We all know the song,
right?
Wee little man.
That's right.
Wee little man is. Come on.
I thought he's the Irish guy, right? But anyway, so he goes to great lengths to see Jesus, obviously. But you think about, there has to be a desperation. Because this is a wealthy man, successful. These aren't the type of people you typically see hanging out of a tree. That's a teenager to do, or a college student. That's not the action of an old tax collector,
chief tax collector.
Right.
Grand poobah.
And so Jesus spots him and says, "Hey, Zacchaeus, I want to come to your house." Zacchaeus excitedly, enthusiastically welcomes Jesus in his home. You don't really know what the conversation is that Jesus shares. Right. Whatever happens there, Zacchaeus all of a sudden stands up and says, "Hey, I'm going to make restitution. The people I've harmed, I'm going to restore half of this and half of that and 4 times this and all these kind of things." If you start doing the math, he's going to give away more than he has almost. It's like this overwhelming sense of want to make things right. And Jesus' comment is, truly salvation has come to this house. Salvation is reflected in that amends process, because all of a sudden I realized the kingdom and spiritual things matter far more than the material, and he's willing to relinquish all material things. That's genuine repentance. Here's a guy whose whole life has been spent on materially collecting,
right,
and now he's willing to divest himself of all of that because of a spiritual conviction. And so that's basically, Zacchaeus is a perfect illustration of what this step is really about. It's not about the material things. It's about the heart that says that, I'm totally flip-flopping what really matters in my life to the spiritual things matter far more than anything materially, and that my relationship with you matters more than anything else in all the world. And I want to make that right.
Yeah, he stands in contrast to what we call the rich young ruler, who is looking for what are the commands I need to follow. And he's like, well, I've done all these. Well, you need to go sell everything you have and give to the poor, because that must be what is something at his heart that is keeping him from the full embrace of the kingdom. And here we see a very wealthy man who is, in the prompting of spending time with Jesus, comes to that conclusion. And as you're describing the situation, that's not what you're going to hear in our churches today about how salvation comes.
Right.
It's something that's quite a bit different and much easier, if you will, to accept and take a step, and then we don't talk about what it really means in our heart.
It goes back to what you said. So many times we look at salvation as some kind of box checking thing. Okay, I believe this, I do this, okay, I do this, and now I'm good, and not a real transformation in which this upside down world becomes the dominating force of my life. All of a sudden I flip flop my values and put the things of God above all other things, when in Zacchaeus' case, everything else had been, certainly the material world, had been his passion up to that point.
Yeah, and it just seems like in this story, it's very obvious that amends are probably going to cost you something.
Right.
And here for him, it obviously hit his bank account. But if nothing else, your own sense of pride and humility comes into being, and probably that maybe that's what keeps us often from it's easier just to say, hey, I'm sorry, versus now making amends, taking a step, being willing to go beyond that in a meaningful way. I came across a study done a couple years ago, and I think there's a number of them been done, about apologies versus making restitution or making amends. And, with the control groups where an offense happens against them and they receive an apology or no apology, and then they receive an apology and some restitution, and just how much greater an effect having that restitution, having that amends comes. Apology is good. It's great, but when someone sees that you're making amends, it seems like they can probably detect that you've now got some real skin in this game. And it's almost that faith, which is belief, versus faith, which is trust. It's I'm sorry, and I'm going to make it up to you as best I can.
Right. Absolutely. I agree.
Really important. You also, I know, refer to another situation in Jesus' life where that highlights this issue in Luke chapter 7.
Yeah. There's a story where Jesus goes to a prominent Pharisee's house again, Simon, and Simon's invited him to a meal.
It seems intentional that he finds himself at certain homes to make certain points.
Right. And so, and of course, Jesus being immediately kind of cared for by a sinful woman. She's crying over him. She's pouring perfume on him. She's wiping his feet with her hair, all these kind of things. And of course, Simon didn't say anything, but he's thinking, if this guy were a prophet, he'd certainly know what kind of woman this is, and he wouldn't allow things like this to happen. And this is a very embarrassing situation. And obviously, I'm questioning his standing with God, because a person that stood right with God would not allow that kind of thing to happen to him.
And we should be fair. We probably all have people in that category in our life, that
Sure.
we could never imagine, touching them, being in the same room with them.
Sure. And so, and then, Jesus, kind of says to Simon, he says, well, Simon, let me tell you a story. He told a story about, two people, one owed a little bit, one owed a lot. And he said, and the person who owed, they owed it to, he forgave both equally. Who's going to be more grateful? And Simon has the right answer, right? He says, well, obviously the one who has a greater debt, And so it's interesting that Simon, like a lot of people in our churches, again, and a lot of people in religion, we have the right answers when it comes to a biblical question. We can sit in Bible class, we can raise our hand and give the right answer every time. And yet that doesn't really impact Simon's heart here.
Yeah.
And Jesus all of a sudden reveals, that, and he says, well, do you see this woman? And I think it's the telling moment. Do you see this woman? Because Simon didn't see the woman, but he saw a sinner, he saw a classification, he saw all these different issues. He didn't see the woman.
A theological discussion, which is horrible.
So then, obviously, Jesus says this woman whose sins have been many have been forgiven, and he kind of says this: he has been forgiven much, loves much. He's been forgiven maybe very little, loves a little, and kind of implies Simon being that latter category. So, I think again, when I recognize the amazing enormity of my brokenness, my harm that I've done, the biblical response, the godly response, the repentant response, the recovery response is one of great grief and amends, outpouring of love and passion that ultimately yields this incredible gratitude and opens us up for the kind of love that God wants to bring about in our lives.
I don't spend a lot of time with the guys in their recovery journey in my role here, but do get to do money with them. And one guy recently was really moved deeply in taking out a pretty substantial amount of money out of his account to go start to make some restitution to, it was, I believe, a dad and an uncle, or an uncle and a cousin, and from years ago. And when he came back, and you could just sense in him a great relief. And also, he wasn't able to pay all of it back yet, but also this sense of connection again with his family, because they said, hey, take your time, but seeing him make this step and starting to make amends, and he could just physically, he was just so moved to how important it was. And so it's not hanging over his head, but it's also reconnecting with the love of a family. And I'm guessing you see that a lot when family sees their guy
Absolutely
start to turn back, start to make the overture that I'm willing to do this.
Sure.
We want to have close family. It's not like we're looking to alienate and ostracize. And if we've been in that condition, how quickly we can come back together.
And one of the things I think is really important in this is the 8th step, right? So we've done 7 steps before we've even started making a list. The 9th step, we're actually going to start doing something.
Take some time.
So it takes time. And a lot of times what guys want to do is they want to rush out and do all this right away. And I just warn here that a lot of times what that is it's this pride welling up that I want to kind of save my hide. I want to feel better about myself. So I'm going to kind of quickly make amends, look like a hero, kind of win everyone over.
Yeah.
But it's not a transformation yet.
Right.
And, I watch a lot of families, and, before these amends start happening, before these restitutions start happening, just, it's amazing how many families can just see it in their eyes. They can see it in their demeanor.
They know it's coming.
Right. They can see the posture.
Yeah.
And that they know that there is a deep sense of change happening in their lives, that the restitution, all those things will take care of themselves down the road when they should. But that, I think that's a lot different than a lot of us who want to kind of run out quickly and try to make amends, to assuage our guilt, to win them over, convince them that I really am uniquely different, which, anytime we try to do that, obviously backfires, because that just causes mistrust, because once again, it looks like somebody's just trying to persuade me, win me, manipulate me, take advantage of me by convincing me of something that's not yet true.
Yeah, and it's like so many things in our spiritual journey. Two different people, you can look the exact same in what you're doing, but where it's coming from makes all the difference. Right. And what the motivation is, what the desired outcome is, and where the heart is.
Right.
And so we move on to 3 more steps, 4 more steps. I can't, where this is only 8, we're getting to 12. And I'm looking forward to seeing where those go. Any last thoughts here on this journey?
Well, the only thing I would just say about this one is this is, again, an internal step. This is becoming willing to do this. Okay. It's making a list and becoming willing.
Still haven't quite opened the door yet,
right? But
we know who we're going to go.
Right. And if you notice, it says amends to them all.
All.
And I think that's an important word there, all. It's like, oh, yeah, I got these ones. Well, is that all? I got all these. What is that all? Kind of like my friend, all of a sudden, there's that one relative that I have. I mean, even though I'm a number of years in my recovery, there's this one that I've kind of no. And finally, they're coming to, announce that there is an other, and then begin to consider how they're going to become part of that all. And I think that's, because a lot of times we can do a good job of superficially handling a lot of things and then hold on to those 1 or 2 relationships, those 1 or 2 events, those 1 or 2 things. And that will keep us trapped if we don't vulnerably deal with the all.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that. I had that underlined, but didn't quite think about, I think that's so common across all walks of life. It's like, hey, how are you doing in this area? I'm doing really well. Well, yeah, it'll look, from a distance, but there's just one little sliver of that where I'm not willing to do the all in this relationship. Right. Are you loving people well? Yeah, well, except for this one person or this one category of person. Right. And this is also very active as far as, we're moving from maybe some passive things and to now I've got to participate in this. I've got, this is not it's in a sense, it's a formula, but how you make amends is going to be very unique to that situation and you're the initiative that you have to take, and no one can do this for you. Right. No one can push this and thrust this upon you. And I know we see that all the time with our residents, just even the program. There's a lot of things you can kind of by rote do, but there's come these big moments and these big parts, which is like, this is you having some wisdom about how to go forward here.
Absolutely.
Well, I appreciate you sitting down again. And again, happy birthday.
Thank you.
And appreciate all that you're doing for the men here and for this community and what we're trying to accomplish in these men's lives. And I know that it's through things like this that the impact of their own recovery now is going to go out into transforming families and relationships. And that's the beauty of the kingdom message. Well, thank you for joining us. And if you have any questions about His Way, we invite you to go to our website at hiswayinc.org.